Revisiting our top story here on Canada Tonight, a Minnesota court today convicted two men on human smuggling charges. The case involved a family from India that froze to death trying to cross the Canada-U.S. border in 2022. An Indian national and an American were found guilty of human trafficking and criminal conspiracy. The family of four died crossing from Manitoba to Minnesota during a blizzard. Two of the victims were children, one of whom was an infant. Canadian authorities discovered their bodies just 12 meters from the border. The two men will be sentenced at a later date. For more on the significance of this ruling, we are joined now by Audrey Macklin. She is the chair in human rights law at the University of Toronto, and she is in Vancouver tonight. Ms. Macklin, thank you for being here. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Let me get your reaction to this verdict. What do you make of these two men being found guilty on all charges?
Of course, it's tragic that this family died while trying to cross the border. The language of immoral depravity really shines the light on the people who do the smuggling, but what it does is deflect attention from the circumstances that create a market for smuggling. So, in fact, as borders become more militarized, governments that do that create a market for smugglers. Basically, the United States has militarized its southern border in order to prevent people from moving through Mexico to the United States. And this very predictably leads to a kind of alternative route through Canada. So as countries restrict their borders ever more harshly and violently, they really produce a kind of job creation program for smugglers. And so what we see then are smugglers now at the northern border engaging in this with predictably horrific, tragic, lethal results.
Let me ask you about the recent election of Donald Trump, because he has promised mass deportations from the United States. We're going into winter. Are you concerned at all that we could see people trying to cross into Canada and a similar situation playing out?
Well, remember that the case we're talking about now is about people moving from Canada into the United States. You're talking about a reverse movement.
Correct.
And that would be a direct product of people being fearful of what will happen to them if they stay in the United States. They may fear deportation. Some of those people may be refugees, refugee claimants, asylum seekers, who ordinarily, before 2004, would have been able to seek refugee protection in Canada. But because of the Canada-U.S. Safe Third Country Agreement, they can no longer do that. And so they are driven into more risky, dangerous ways of crossing the border. So the fear I think that people have is that if conditions in the United States get bad enough, some people may seek protection in Canada, but they won't be able to do it in a safe manner.
Changes made last year to U.S.-Canada border policy now allow Canada to turn back migrants at the border. What kind of impact is that having on the business of smuggling?
Well, it's a job creation program for smugglers. That's pretty much what it is. It will, prior to the Safe Third Country Agreement, somebody who is seeking refugee protection could show up at the Canadian port of entry at the Canada-U.S. border and ask for refugee protection. They didn't need smugglers. They would just go to the border port of entry and ask for protection, and they would, be processed there. Not everybody who did that met the definition of a refugee. Not everybody was eligible and so on, but it was a safe, lawful, regular mechanism for seeking refugee protection. And of course, once you close that down and people are still desperate to get refugee protection, if they're desperate enough, they are going to seek alternative means of entry. And so right now, that means that they are thrown into the hands of smugglers who offer them for payment, the opportunity to cross clandestinely into Canada, and they do so, as we can see, at great risk and expense, and with potentially dangerous results.
What can you tell us about the current volume of smuggling and the conditions that people are facing?
I don't have any data on the current volume of smuggling. I think there is no question but that it has gone up as Canada has sought to make the Canada-U.S. border yet more restrictive. I think in the past there wasn't a lot of smuggling, partly because people were entering, if they were seeking to enter the United States, they were doing it through Mexico, but partly because, as I said, before the Safe Third Country Agreement, they could do it by just appearing at a port of entry. Now, the Safe Third Country Agreement, as the label implies, its title, depends on both countries, Canada and the United States, being safe places to seek refugee protection. One of the concerns that one must have about the re-election of Donald Trump is that if he carries through on his threats, then the United States will no longer be a safe place for people to seek refugee protection. And that would mean that the agreement which requires people to seek refugee protection in the first country they arrived in, as between Canada and the United States, that may no longer be a valid agreement. Because if the United States isn't a safe place, that's the basis of the agreement.
Right. Let me just ask you one real quick here before I have to run. When people see the picture of this family, you can't help your heart aches and breaks for this family. This trial has drawn so much attention to how lucrative this type of enterprise has become. What needs to change to stop organizations from profiting off those vulnerable that are hoping to cross the border?
Well, as I said before, restrictive borders create the market for smugglers. If it is the case that we think that there will be people who will flee the United States because they can't get refugee protection there, Canada, in the course of protecting or controlling its border, has choices about how to respond. And militarizing the border will predictably create a market for smugglers, and we will see more of these kinds of tragic outcomes. Okay.
Ms. Macklin, we have to leave it there. That is Audrey Macklin, the chair in Human Rights Law at the University of Toronto, joining us tonight from Vancouver.